She traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met. She spent every last dollar she had on a train ticket to Wyoming, clutching letters that promised her a new life, a home, and a family. But when Clara stepped off that platform, the man waiting for her looked at her like she was a stranger. "I never asked for a wife," he said coldly. "I didn't write those letters. You need to go back where you came from." Every person on that platform turned to stare. The whispers started. The humiliation burned through her like fire. She was about to walk away in shame when a small voice cut through the silence. "Papa, stop! I wrote those letters, every single one of them." A 7-year-old boy had summoned a stranger across the country to save his broken father. But what Clara didn't know was that staying would cost her everything, including her heart. Sometimes the family you never expected becomes the home you always needed. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling me what you would have done in Clara's shoes. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe so you never miss another story that matters. That July sun in Drywell Crossing felt like a blacksmith's hammer. Clara Whitman felt it beating down on her dark dress as she stepped off the train. She was holding a worn-out suitcase and a letter that had been folded and refolded 100 times. The whole place smelled like dust and railroad ties. She was the only one left standing on that platform. All the other folks had run off to meet their families. Clara's eyes searched the crowd, looking for the man from the letters, the one who was tall and weathered by the Wyoming wind. She had his words memorized from the 3-day trip out from Philadelphia. A voice from behind her, as rough and cold as winter iron, said, "Miss Whitman?" Clara turned, and her heart skipped a beat. It was him, all right. Ethan Cole stood taller than most, with a face that looked like it was carved from stone. There was no welcome in his eyes, just a deep, tired sadness. "Mr. Cole," she said, trying to sound steady as she held out her hand, "I am so pleased to finally—" He cut her off. "This is a mistake." He did not take her hand, would not even look at it. "I do not know who sent you letters, but it was not me." He paused, his jaw tight. "I never asked for a wife." Those words landed like a punch to the gut. All around them, the talking stopped. Every person on that platform turned to stare. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I do not understand," she said. "The letters had your name. They talked about your son, your ranch." "I did not write them," he said, each word sharp. "I do not want a wife. I do not need one." His voice got quiet, but in the dead silence everyone heard him say, "You need to go on back where you came from." Shame washed over her like a hot wave. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, the old women whispering, the ranch hands grinning. "I spent every last dollar I had to get here," she said, hating the shake in her voice. "The letters promised—" "Well, I don't," Ethan said flatly. "There is a train heading back east in the morning. I will pay for your ticket." He started to walk away, but something inside Clara just snapped. She had traveled 2,000 miles for a new life, leaving behind a tiny room and a lonely existence. She had gambled everything on the hope in those letters. "You are a coward," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Ethan froze and turned back slowly. For the first time, he really looked at her, his eyes like a cold winter storm. "What did you say?" Clara lifted her chin, even though she was trembling. "I said you are a coward. Whatever hurt you, you are using it as an excuse to hurt someone else. Someone who traveled all this way because your letters, or someone's letters, offered a little bit of hope." The silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. "You do not know a thing about me," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I know you are a widower," she shot back. "I know you have a little boy, and this ranch is struggling. I know because the letters told me. And I know," she went on, her voice getting stronger, "that whoever wrote them cared enough to find help for you, which is more than you are doing for yourself." A muscle twitched in his cheek. "Those letters had no right." "Papa, stop!" A child's voice sliced through the tension. A small boy, no older than 7, ran out from the crowd and stood right between them. He was thin, with his father's dark hair and eyes that looked too old for his face. His clothes were patched and faded. "Noah, get back to the wagon," Ethan ordered. "No," the boy said, sticking his chin out. "You cannot send her away. I will not let you." "Son, this is not your business." "Yes, it is," Noah's voice cracked. "I sent the letters. I wrote every one of them. I used your name because I knew you were too stubborn to do it yourself." The platform buzzed with whispers. The world seemed to tilt under Clara's feet. Those beautiful, heartbreaking letters had been written by a child. Tears started rolling down the boy's dusty face. "I did what you were too scared to do," he cried. "I found someone to help us. Someone to make the house not feel so empty. Someone to maybe make you stop looking so sad all the time." The boy finally broke down, sobbing. "Mama's been gone a whole year, and you will not talk about her. I just thought if someone nice came—" He could not finish. Without a second thought, Clara knelt in the dust, not caring about her dress. She put a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Noah, look at me." He looked up, his eyes full of tears. "You are so brave," she said softly, speaking just to him. "What you did took courage. You saw your father was hurting, and you tried to help. That is not wrong, Noah, that is love." "I just wanted us to be a family again," he whispered. Clara looked up at Ethan, whose face was a storm of anger and grief and shock. "Mr. Cole," she said, standing up but keeping a hand on Noah's shoulder. "I know this is not what you wanted. It is not what I wanted either. But your son brought me here. The least we can do is talk about this in private, not in front of the whole town." Ethan looked like he was chewing on nails, but after a long moment he gave a short, stiff nod. "Fine. The wagon is this way." He turned and walked away without another word. Noah grabbed Clara's hand, his own small hand tight in hers, and pulled her along. "Come on, Miss Whitman," he said. Behind them, the gossip started up like a flock of crows. "Did you hear? The boy sent for her. That Ethan Cole will send her right back, you mark my words." Clara just kept her back straight and her eyes forward. She had faced worse than small-town talk. She held onto Noah's hand and let him lead her toward the plain, sturdy wagon, ready for whatever was coming next. Assistance. Noah climbed onto the wagon seat, then reached his small hand down to Clara. "Here, Miss Whitman, that step can be a mean one." She gratefully took his hand and pulled herself up. The bench was a tight squeeze for 3 people, and she was pressed right up against Noah as Ethan snapped the reins. The horses lurched forward, and they rode through town without a word. Drywall Crossing was bigger than Clara had expected. It had a real main street with a general store, a saloon, and a church. Folks stopped what they were doing to stare as the wagon passed. Clara just kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. Once they were out of town, the land opened up wide and empty. The only sounds were the creaking wagon wheels and the plodding of the horses. "Miss Whitman," Noah's voice was small, "are you mad at me about the letters?" Clara looked down at the boy's worried face. "No, sweetheart, I am not mad. Your papa is surprised. There is a big difference." Noah whispered, "He's always mad. Ever since Mama died." Clara glanced over at Ethan. His jaw was set like stone, his eyes locked on the horizon. "Grief makes people feel all sorts of things," Clara said gently. "Sometimes it looks like anger, but underneath, I suspect your papa is just very sad." "Are you sad too?" Noah asked. "Is that why you came?" The honest question made Clara's composure waver. "Yes," she admitted. "I suppose I am. I was all alone back in Philadelphia. I had work, but no family. Then your letters arrived. They gave me hope that I could be needed somewhere." "We need you," Noah said with pure certainty. You can teach me my letters and numbers. Papa says I need schooling, and the house is a mess, and our old housekeeper left. She said the sadness in the house was too thick to breathe. Noah, Ethan's sharp voice cut in. That is enough. The boy went quiet, shrinking into himself. Clara's heart ached for him. She had seen it before, children trying to hold broken adults together. The ranch appeared over the top of a low hill. It was a simple place, but neat. A main house, a barn, and a few other buildings stood in a dusty yard. The whole place should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt heavy with silence. Ethan stopped the wagon and got down without a word, heading straight for the barn. Papa, Noah called, where are you going? To work, the single word came back. Noah's face started to crumble. Clara put a hand on his shoulder. It is all right, he just needs some time. He is going to send you away, the boy said, his voice thick with tears. I know he is. Maybe, Clara said, climbing down. But I am here now, so why don't you show me this house of yours? Noah's eyes lit up with a little hope. Really? You will stay? I will stay for a proper conversation at least, Clara promised, grabbing her bag. Now, lead the way. I could surely use a glass of water. The boy nearly jumped from the wagon, his sadness replaced with a burst of energy. This way, Miss Whitman. Mind that loose step, and the screen door sticks something awful. The house was just as she had pictured. It was sturdy, but crying out for care. Dust coated the simple furniture. The kitchen was a mess of unwashed dishes and grimy windows that blocked the afternoon sun. But beneath all the neglect, Clara saw the bones of a good home. There was a strong fireplace and a big kitchen table, the kind where a family was meant to gather. It is not much, Noah said, watching her face. Mama used to make it nice. She put up curtains and put flowers in jars. But after she died, Papa said there was no point to any of it. Clara set down her bag. What did your mama pass from, Noah? A fever, he said, his voice flat. It came on fast. One day she was fine, making a pie. 3 days later, she was gone. Papa does not talk about it. He took down all her pictures. Said it hurt too much to look at them. Clara's own heart tightened. Her parents had died when she was just 19, leaving her completely alone. She understood wanting to bury the pain. But grief does not stay buried. I'm so sorry, Noah. The words felt small, but she meant them. He just shrugged. It has been a year. Papa says I should be over it. Grief does not follow a calendar, Clara said softly. A noise made them both turn. Ethan was standing in the doorway, covered in dust. His face was hard to read. Noah, go feed the chickens. The boy looked between the two adults, then hurried out the back door. When he was gone, the kitchen was quiet. Clara waited. I owe you an apology, Ethan finally said, surprising her. Go on. What I said back at the station was wrong. You did not deserve that. He looked her in the eye, and she saw real regret. You were a guest, and I treated you poorly. You were surprised, Clara said. That is no excuse for being cruel, he answered, turning his hat in his hands. My son went behind my back and brought you clear across the country. So what will you do? Clara asked. I do not know, he admitted. The right thing to do is send you home with money for your trouble. But Noah is right. The house is a wreck. I cannot teach him. And after that scene in town, the gossips will have a field day. If I send you away now, they will ruin your name. And if I stay? Clara asked, her heart pounding. If you stay, Ethan said bluntly, they will just ruin it in a different way. An unmarried woman living under my roof? It is not proper. It is just a job, she insisted. A man from the territorial office, a Mr. Finch, came by this morning, Ethan continued, his voice tight. Said they received anonymous complaints about the moral situation here. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Complaints? About what? About you. About us. He said an unmarried woman living and working on a bachelor's homestead is a violation of the territory's moral decency codes. That is insane, Clara whispered. He said they are investigating, Ethan went on. If they find a violation, they can revoke my claim to this land. They can take everything. Widower's roof. Folks will talk, and they'll make your life a living hell. We are both caught in a bind. Clara folded her arms, feeling ruined either way. You are not trapped, Ethan said, his voice low. You have a choice. He offered her two paths. Leave now with enough money for a clean start somewhere new, or stay for 1 month. You will teach Noah and help around the place. I will pay you a proper wage, he explained. If it does not work out, I will still pay your fare back east. No hard feelings. Clara watched him. And the gossip? Let them talk. A muscle in his jaw tightened. I have handled worse. The offer was fair, but it felt off. Why? She asked. Why not just send me on my way? Ethan took a long pause, his voice turning raw. Because my son called me a coward to my face. And he was right. The blunt honesty shocked her. I have been hiding from my grief, from my duties, from Noah. I thought I was being strong for him, but I just left him to face his sorrow all alone. You came 2,000 miles because of letters my 7-year-old son wrote, he said. That is born from desperation or courage. Likely both. The least I can do is give you a fair shot. Clara felt a change inside her. This man was rough around the edges, worn down by grief, but he was honest. He could admit when he was wrong, a quality she had not seen in many men. 1 month, she declared, with a weekly wage and Sunday afternoons for myself. Done, he agreed. And one more thing, she added, lifting her chin. I will not stand for you being harsh with Noah out of frustration. If I see it, I will call you on it. Ethan's eyebrows lifted. You have got some grit. I will give you that. I had to learn, she said, holding out her hand. Do we have a deal, Mr. Cole? He took her hand, his grip firm and calloused. We have a deal, Miss Whitman. With that handshake, her path was set. 30 days to help a boy, tend to a broken home, and prove her own worth. Chance. And she knew a chance was worth a fight. Dawn was just a promise on the horizon when sounds of the house waking up stirred Clara. Boots on the floorboards, the clang of a coffee pot. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, the silence of the country, wind, cattle, creaking wood, a stark change from the city. Sleep had been scarce as her mind replayed the last day. Ethan's harsh rejection, Noah's confession, and the deal she had struck. Now, in the quiet dark, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. A light tap on the door broke her thoughts. Miss Whitman, Noah whispered. Are you awake? I am now. Come on in. The door opened to show Noah in his nightshirt. Papa is fixing breakfast. Says it will be ready in about 10 minutes, but it will not be anything special. Tell your papa I will be right down, Clara said, smiling at his serious delivery. But Noah lingered in the doorway. Miss Whitman, you are really staying? You did not change your mind? His hopeful voice was almost heartbreaking. I am staying for a month, just like I said. A whole month, he breathed. That is 30 days. 31, actually. It is July. His face lit up. Even better. I'm glad you are here, even if Papa is grumpy. Your Papa is allowed his feelings, Clara told him gently. This is hard on him. Noah's shoulders slumped. Nothing is easy for him now. He used to laugh and play. Now he is just tired. Clara knelt to look him in the eye. Noah, your father is grieving. That is a hurt that takes a long, long time to mend. Nothing we do can make it disappear. Tears welled in the boy's eyes. Then why did I ask you to come? What is the point? Because, she said softly, we can help with the everyday things, the cooking and the chores. That does not fix the hurt, but it makes it easier to bear. And sometimes just not being alone is what matters most. Noah nodded, his expression serious. Are you lonely, Miss Whitman? Very, she confessed. But I am hoping that will change. The boy hugged her tight, a sudden fierce embrace. Pulling back, he promised, I will help you. I am a good helper, and I can show you how the tricky stove works. I would like that very much. They went down to the kitchen, Noah talking a mile a minute about the ranch. Ethan was at the stove, his back to them. Bacon sizzled in a skillet. Sit, he grunted, not turning. Food is almost on. Clara sat at the rough table, taking in the 3 mismatched plates and bent forks. Ethan served them burnt bacon and overdone eggs right from the skillet. It was not much, but Clara was starving. Thank you, she said. He just grunted in reply. They ate in a tense quiet, broken only by the sound of their forks. Noah looked back and forth between the 2 adults, wanting to speak but holding his tongue. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I am out on the range from sunup to sundown. Fence needs mending, cattle get sick, the work never ends. He looked at her directly. Point is, you and the boy will be on your own most days. I understand. There is food in the cellar. Cook what you need. I am not a picky man. Clara glanced at the scorched bacon. I noticed, she said quietly. For a split second, his eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of surprise, maybe even humor, before it was gone. Back, he told her. It is all overgrown, but you are welcome to fix it up. I would appreciate that. The town is about 3 miles east. You will find a general store, a post office, and a church. The wagon is yours to use for supplies, but... He paused. It might be best you lay low for a spell. Clara knew he meant the gossip, that her being here was already a scandal. I will be careful. Thank you. Ethan finished his coffee and stood up. I will be in the north pasture today. If you need me for something serious, ring the barn bell 3 times. He took his hat from the peg and was out the door before Clara could say another word. The house fell quiet, and Noah looked up at her. He is not always this grumpy, he said, just most of the time. Clara almost smiled. That is all right. We have got work to do. Finish your breakfast and then show me where your mother kept the soap and rags. The boy's face brightened. You are really going to clean? From the floorboards to the rafters, Clara promised. This place has been neglected long enough. They worked hard all morning. Clara found rags, soap, and a leaky bucket. She tied back her hair, rolled up her sleeves, and went to war with the dust and grime. Noah was a big help, chattering on about the ranch and his mother. Mama used to sing while she cleaned, he mentioned, as Clara scrubbed the kitchen floor. She said it made the work go by quicker. What songs did she sing? Church hymns, mostly, and one about a girl waiting by the river. He hummed a few notes, a little off-key, but sweet. Clara knew the tune. It was an old ballad about heartache and waiting. I know that song, she said quietly. My own mother used to sing it. Will you sing it for me? Maybe later. Right now, this floor needs to be clean enough to eat off of. Why would we eat off the floor? Noah asked, confused. Clara let out a laugh that surprised even her. It is just a saying, honey. It means it is very, very clean. By noon, the kitchen was already looking 100 times better. The windows sparkled and the floors shone. Clara's back ached, and her hands were sore, but she felt a deep satisfaction. This was something she could fix. Noah stared from the doorway. It looks like it did when Mama was here. Does that make you sad? Clara asked him gently. He thought about it for a moment. A little, he said, but it makes me happy too. Maybe she can see it and know we remembered how she liked things. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. She turned away, pretending to be busy with a rag. I am sure she knows, sweetheart. After a small lunch of bread and cheese, Clara decided it was time for Noah's lessons. She found some old school books and a slate upstairs. They sat at the clean table, and she quickly saw he knew very little. He could barely write his name and knew just a few words. His father had been too lost in his own grief to teach him. Clara started with the basics, showing him patience as he struggled. I am no good at this, he mumbled after trying to spell horse for the 5th time. You are learning, Clara said softly. That is not the same as being good or bad. She guided his hand with the chalk. Your mind is like a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets. For real? For real. And you are a very smart boy, Noah. I can tell. You just need a little practice. He looked up at her and smiled, soaking in the praise. They worked for another hour before she sent him out to do his chores, watching him run to the chicken coop with a new spring in his step. The afternoon was long and quiet. Clara moved on to the main room, beating dust from the furniture and opening windows to let in the fresh air. In a drawer, she found photographs wrapped in a piece of cloth. A woman with kind, dark eyes smiled back at her. It was Noah's mother. She looked so full of life. Clara looked at the pictures, trying to imagine the woman who had filled this house with love and song. She gently wrapped them back up and put them away. It was not her place to put them out. That was a choice for Ethan to make. By sunset, Clara was bone-tired. Her dress was dirty, her hair was a mess, and every muscle in her body ached. But the house felt different. It was not perfect, but it felt like a home again. It felt cared for. She started on dinner, working with what she could find. Some potatoes, onions, and a little salt pork. It was not fancy, but she knew how to make a simple meal taste good, a skill she learned from her own mother. Ethan came in just as she was putting bowls on the table. He stopped cold in the doorway, his eyes taking in the clean floors, the sparkling windows, and the warm smell of stew. "You have been busy," was all he said. "It is what you hired me for." He hung his hat on its peg and stood there looking like a stranger in his own kitchen. "You did not have to do all this in one day." "I had the time," she replied. "Dinner is ready. Noah is washing up." The meal was quiet again, but not as tense as the morning. Noah chattered about finding 2 new eggs, asking if they could have them for breakfast. "If Miss Whitman does not mind cooking them," Ethan said. "I do not mind at all." After dinner, while Ethan was in the barn, Noah helped Clara with the dishes. "You learn fast," Clara told him. "I want to do it right, so you will stay," he said quietly. "Noah, I told you I would stay for a month. You do not have to earn it." "But what if you change your mind?" His voice was small and worried. "What if you decide it is too hard or that Papa is too mean?" Clara stopped what she was doing and turned to him. "Look at me, Noah." She waited for him to meet her eyes. "I gave you my word. I do not break my promises, not to you and not to your father. Do you believe me?" He studied her face for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "I believe you." "Good. Now, after we finish here, how about we read a story before bed?" His whole face lit up. "Really? You will read to me? Mama used to read me stories every night about knights and dragons." His voice grew soft. "Papa tried after she was gone, but he always got sad and had to stop. Well, what if I read and you follow along with me? That way you can practice your words." "Yes!" he nearly shouted. "I will go get the book." He ran upstairs and came back with a worn-out book of fairy tales. They sat together on the sofa, with Clara reading slowly as Noah's little finger traced each word. His excitement was far greater than his skill, but he tried his best. When he got stuck, she helped him gently. They were in the middle of a story about a girl who outsmarted a giant when the front door opened and Ethan walked in. He stopped dead in his tracks, then started for the stairs without a word. "Papa," Noah called out. "Miss Whitman's reading to me. You want to listen?" Ethan froze on the bottom step. "It is getting late." "Please, just one more," Noah begged. "We are almost done," Clara said softly. Ethan's jaw was a hard line. For a second she was sure he would say no just to be difficult. Instead, he gave a stiff nod and sank into a nearby chair, watching them. Clara kept reading, feeling his eyes on her. Noah was lost in the tale, leaning right against her. When the story ended, Noah let out a happy sigh. "All right, time for bed," Ethan announced, getting to his feet. "School tomorrow." "Can we read again tomorrow?" Noah asked, his eyes wide with hope. "We will see," Clara told him. Noah gave her a quick hug and ran upstairs. From the landing, he called, "Good night, Papa, good night, Miss Whitman." "Good night, Noah," they said together. The house fell quiet. Clara stood up. "I should be turning in, too." "Miss Whitman," Ethan's voice was rough. "About the reading." He looked like he was wrestling with his own words. "I have not seen him that happy in a long time." "He is a good boy," she said. "He deserves to be happy." "I know that," he snapped back. "You think I do not know that?" "I think you are doing the best you can," Clara said gently. "But sorrow can make a person forget simple things like bedtime stories." "You have been here one day," he said, his eyes flashing. "Do not pretend to know what I have forgotten." "You are right. I am sorry." She met his glare. "But I know what it is like to be Noah. I lost my mother and father inside of 6 months. I know how it feels when your only parent left just fades away into their grief." His anger melted into surprise. "Both of them?" "When I was 19. My father's heart gave out. My mother followed soon after. They called it pneumonia, but I reckon it was a broken heart. I understand loss, Mr. Cole. Maybe not your kind of loss, but I understand it." He was quiet for a long time. "I did not know." "How could you?" she said, then turned for the stairs. "I will see you in the morning." This time, he let her go. The days soon fell into a rhythm. Ethan was gone from sunup to sundown, a silent man at the dinner table. Noah, though, became her shadow. The boy was hungry for learning and for kindness. Together, they brought the house and garden back to life, one small task at a time. Clara mended clothes, tended the chickens, and taught the boy his numbers. The hard work tired her out, but it filled an empty place in her soul. For the first time in years, she felt needed. On her Sunday off, she walked far out into the sow pasture, finding a spot under an old cottonwood tree. The sky was bigger and bluer than any she had ever seen. This hard, strange life was nothing like the letters promised, but she was surprised to find she did not regret coming. When she got back to the house near sunset, Noah was sitting on the porch steps, waiting. His face lit up when he saw her. "I was scared you had left for good." "I told you I would be back," she said gently. "I know, but—" He just shrugged, looking at the ground. Clara sat down next to him. "It is hard to trust folks when they keep leaving, I know. But I'm not going anywhere." "Not yet," he said. "But you will, when the month is over." She could not lie to him. "Maybe, or maybe your father will want me to stay on." "What if I asked you to stay forever?" His question went straight to her heart. "Oh, Noah, it is not that simple." "Why not?" "Because your father has to want that too. And he is just trying to get through each day right now." Noah looked down. "Do you think he will ever be happy again?" "I do," she said softly. "Happiness comes back, just in little pieces. It takes time." They sat quietly for a while, watching the sun go down. 3 days later, that peace was broken. Clara was weeding the garden when a wagon pulled up. Noah ran back from the road, his eyes wide. "There is a lady here, Miss Whitman. A real fancy one." A fancy lady was the last thing she expected to see. Around the side of the house, a fine carriage was stopping in the yard. The woman who stepped out wore a dress that probably cost a year of Clara's wages. She was perfect, from her coiled hair to her shiny shoes. "You must be the Miss Whitman," the woman said, her voice as crisp as a new dollar bill. "I am Margaret Thornberry. My father's land borders this ranch." "A pleasure," Clara said, painfully aware of the dirt on her own dress. Margaret looked her up and down with clear disgust. "I heard a rumor in town about an uninvited mail-order bride. I had to come see for myself." The insult stung. "I am here as a teacher for the boy," Clara said evenly. "Nothing more." Of course, Margaret said, though her smile was cold. How kind of Ethan to take in a woman with a questionable reputation. My reputation is my own business. Perhaps. But Ethan's reputation is mine. Margaret stepped in close, her voice low. He and I have had an understanding for a long time. A proper arrangement. Clara felt a cold knot in her stomach. I did not know. Why would you? You are just the hired help. Margaret's smile was pure venom. But I felt you should understand the situation. Ethan needs a suitable wife from a good family, not some desperate creature who answered a letter from a child. The cruelty of it took her breath away. If you have an arrangement with Mr. Cole, you should speak to him about it. Oh, I will. At our private dinner tomorrow night. You will make sure you and the boy are not here. He has not mentioned any dinner plans to me. He will, Margaret said, turning to leave. Enjoy your little adventure out here, Miss Whitman, but do not get too comfortable. She left like a queen departing a peasant's hut. Clara just stood there, stunned by the woman's words. Noah came and took her hand. I do not like her. She is mean. She is just protecting what she believes is hers, Clara said, her voice thin. But Papa is not hers, Noah said firmly. He is ours. The word hung in the air, simple and true. That evening, when Ethan came in for dinner, Clara waited. With his meal. You had a visitor today, she said. Margaret Thornberry. Ethan's fork stopped mid-air. Margaret was here. She wanted to meet me, Clara explained. And she told me you two have plans tomorrow night. His jaw set hard. I do not have any plans. She seemed awfully sure. Well, she is wrong. He put his fork down a little too hard. Margaret has certain ideas. They are not ideas I share. She mentioned you had an understanding. We do not. His voice was flat. Her father wants to combine our ranches, build some kind of cattle empire. Margaret plays along because she is ready to get married, and I am the closest thing to a decent prospect around here. He looked right at Clara. But I have never given her any reason to think I am interested. I have been clear. She does not seem to be listening. Then I will have to be clearer, he said, pushing his chair back. If she comes around tomorrow, you tell her I'm busy. Tell her I will be busy for a long, long time. Mr. Cole, I mean. His eyes flashed. I did not ask for her to meddle in my life any more than I asked for you. But at least you are useful. It was hardly a compliment, but from him it felt like progress. Clara nodded. I will handle it if she returns. But it was not Margaret who returned the next day. It was the gossip she had started. Noah came back from the chicken coop. Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped me, he said, his voice low. She said folks are talking. Said it is not right you be in here. Clara's hands paused in the bread dough she was working. And what did you say? I told her you were my teacher, and that it was none of her business, he said, looking worried. Was that okay? That was perfect, sweetheart. She punched down the dough, working out her anger. But the talk did not die down. In town, she felt the stares and heard the whispers. Women would pull their children away from her, and men looked at her with ugly assumptions. Clara held her head high, but the constant judgment was wearing her thin. Things finally came to a head that Saturday at the general store. Mr. Hricks, the owner, had always been friendly before. But this time, he looked. Clara stood right in front of him, but the storekeeper, Mr. Hendricks, looked straight past her. I have a list of things I need, she said, setting it on the worn wooden counter. Hendricks eyed the paper but did not pick it up. This for the coal account? When she said yes, he pressed on. And you have his permission to be buying things? Mr. Cole sent me himself for these. Hendricks tightened his lips. Well, here is the problem. I have had folks complaining. They would rather not be in here with certain people. The insult was as clear as day, and Clara felt a hot blush creep up her neck. Sir, I'm just buying flour and sugar. I do not see how that troubles anyone. It is not what you are buying, he said, lowering his voice. It is what you are. An unmarried woman living out on the coal place. Folks are talking. I am not living out with him. Her voice shot through the quiet store, making other shoppers turn their heads. I am his housekeeper and the governess for his son. There is nothing wrong about it. Maybe so, Hendricks shrugged. But in a town this small, what people think matters. And they think Ethan Cole is playing house with a woman who got herself into a desperate spot. The words felt like a slap. Behind her, she heard young Noah gasp. My papa is a good man, the boy yelled. And Miss Whitman is good, too. You are just a mean old man. Noah, hush now, Clara whispered. But the boy was not finished. Tears ran down his cheeks. No, I am sick of people being mean. They do not know how sad we were. They do not know you make Papa smile even when he tries to hide it. The whole store was dead silent. Every single person was staring at the crying boy and the shamed woman. Clara made up her mind right then. She stood up straight, took Noah's hand, and marched for the door. Miss Whitman, what about your supplies? Hendricks called out. You can keep them, she said, not even looking back. And you can tell your customers they are welcome to their gossip. But a person's cruelty always finds its way back to them. The ride home was silent, except for Noah's soft crying. When they got back, Ethan was in the yard sharpening an axe. He saw their faces and immediately stopped. What happened? It was nothing, Clara said quickly. But Noah ran past them into the house, sobbing. Ethan turned back to her. Tell me what happened. What? So she told him everything. She kept her voice steady, telling it like a story about someone else. If she let her own feelings in, she knew she would fall apart. With every word, Ethan's face got harder and darker. By the time she was done, his hands were balled into tight fists. I will take care of this, he said, his voice low and dangerous. There is nothing to take care of. It is just town talk. Gossip is one thing, he said. Humiliating you in front of my son is another. He walked straight to the barn. I am riding into town. Mr. Cole, please, do not. I should have done this the day you arrived, he said, throwing a saddle on his horse with a fierce energy. I should have made things clear instead of hiding out here. What are you going to do? He swung himself up onto the horse, and for the first time she saw a fire in his eyes instead of just sadness. I am going to remind this town that the Coles do not answer to them, and neither do the people I have promised to protect. He spurred his horse and took off, kicking up a cloud of dust. Clara watched him go, her heart pounding. She did not know if she should feel saved or scared. When men in small towns defend a woman's honor, it can either end the talk or start a fire. Noah came out of the house, his eyes all red. Is Papa going to yell at Mr. Hendricks? I do not know, sweet boy, she said, pulling him into a hug. But you need to listen to me. This is not your fault. Do you understand? It feels like it is, he mumbled. If I had not written you to come here, you would not be getting hurt. Clara made him look at her. If you had not written those letters, I would still be in a city, teaching children who did not want to learn, and going home to an empty room. You gave me a home, Noah. I will gladly pay whatever price comes with that. They went inside and tried to act normal. Clara tried to make bread, but her hands were shaking too much. Noah just stared at the same page in his book for almost half an hour. Time seemed to crawl by. Ethan came back just as the sun was setting. He got off his horse slowly and took his time putting everything away before walking to the house. Clara met him at the door, trying to read his face. Well? She finally asked. It is handled. What does that mean? He walked past her to the kitchen pump, drank a full cup of water, and then answered. I had a talk with Hendricks. I told him you speak for this house, and your credit is the same as mine. He will not turn you away again. And the other things, he said? The accusations? Ethan set the cup down very carefully. I might have pointed out that spreading lies about the people who work for me would lead to me taking my business somewhere else. For good. You threatened him. I told him the facts, Ethan said, his jaw set hard. Hendricks needs this town's business more than we need his store. He understood that. Clara felt a wave of relief, but also a new worry. You did not have to do that. Yes, he said, finally looking right at her. I did. You came here trusting me. You have worked harder than anyone I have ever known. You brought my son back to life. I will be damned if I let a bunch of gossips with nothing better to do run you off. His words settled over the room, changing everything between them. Thank you, was all she could say. Do not thank me. I should have done it a long time ago. He started for the stairs, but stopped. And Miss Whitman, you were right that day at the train station. I was a coward, hiding from my grief, hiding from my duties. I am done hiding now. He went upstairs, leaving Clara to think about what he had said. That night she could not sleep at all. She listened to the old house groan and settle, her mind racing. Ethan, standing up for her, had given them some peace, but it had not solved the real problem. She was still an unmarried woman living in his house. No matter how proper they were, it looked scandalous. They had agreed on 1 month. She only had 2 weeks left. What would happen then? The question followed her for days. The town gossip did not disappear, but it became quiet whispers instead of open insults. Clara kept teaching Noah, running the house and tending the garden, but she felt like a clock was ticking down. Ethan was still quiet, but he was not cold anymore. He would thank her for dinner or mention how nice the house looked. One night he even sat with them while she read a story to Noah. They were small changes, but they felt huge. Then, 2 weeks before her month was up, a rider came. Clara was hanging laundry when Noah ran out. Miss Whitman, there is a man here with papers for Papa. He looks official. She dried her hands and went to the yard. A man in a city suit sat on a fine black horse. Ethan came out of the barn. Are you Ethan Cole? The man asked. I am. My name is Lawrence Finch. I am an inspector from the land office. He got down from his horse and pulled some papers from his bag. I am here to assess your homestead claim. Ethan's face became a mask. Assess it? I proved this land 3 years ago. New rules require us to review claims, Finch said in a flat voice, especially when there are questions about moral fitness. We have received complaints about the moral character of this household. Clara felt a chill run through her. Noah moved closer, pressing against her leg. What kind of complaints? Ethan's voice was dangerously low. Anonymous ones, Finch said, looking at his papers. They claim you are violating decency standards by housing an unmarried woman in a way that suggests improper relations. The law is clear. A homestead claim can be taken away if the owner shows a pattern of moral failings. That is ridiculous, Clara said. I am his employee. I am a teacher. There is nothing wrong about our arrangement. Finch had barely looked at her. Maybe not to you, ma'am, but this territory has standards. Whose standards? Ethan demanded, his hands in fists. Who made these complaints? They are anonymous, Finch said, putting his papers away. I will be in town for a few days, conducting interviews. If my report concludes that violations have occurred, you will have 30 days to fix the situation before we take back the land. This is ridiculous, Ethan said. You cannot take a man's land because of town gossip. The law says we can, Mr. Cole. Finch climbed back on his horse. I suggest you think about your options. A proper marriage would solve all of this. Or you could dismiss the woman. He rode off, leaving them in a cloud of dust and stunned silence. Clara felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. It could not be happening. All of this because she dared to come here to work. It is Margaret, Ethan said, his voice flat and hard as a rock. This has her and her father written all over it. Over this. Who filed the complaint doesn't matter a bit. What matters is that I'm the reason you're about to lose everything. your land, your home, all that your wife built with you. Ethan's voice cut sharp. Do not. Don't you dare put this on yourself. But it is, isn't it? If I had just gone back to Philadelphia, Noah would still be lonely, and I'd be working myself to the bone, trying to feel nothing. He raked a hand through his hair, his whole body tense with frustration. You heard the man. Marriage or dismissal, those are the only choices their high and mighty morals will accept. Clara hugged herself tightly. Then I will leave. I'll go right now before they finish the assessment. That has to be enough. No. Noah's voice sliced through the air. He stood there, his little fists clenched. You promised you'd stay a whole month. You promised. Honey, things have changed. I don't care. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Everybody leaves. Mama left. Now you're leaving. And Papa will get so sad he'll leave too, and I'll be all alone again. Noah. Ethan reached for him, but the boy pulled back. I hate it. I hate all of it. He bolted for the house, slamming the door so hard the whole frame shook. Dust settled in the quiet yard as a lone hawk cried out overhead. There is a third option, Clara finally said, her voice strained. The one Mr. Finch mentioned. Marriage. Ethan's head snapped in her direction. What? Not a real marriage, she clarified, keeping her eyes on the horizon. Think of it as a legal arrangement, a practical partnership. It would solve the morality issue, protect your claim, and give Noah the stability he needs. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious, she said, finally meeting his gaze. Logically, it makes sense. You need someone to run the house and teach your son. I need a job and a place to live. This would make our arrangement official and end the gossip for good. Marriage is a sacred vow, Ethan said, his voice rough. Sometimes it is about survival, Clara countered. My grandmother married my grandfather after she was widowed. She had 3 children to feed, and he needed help on his farm. It was a practical match between 2 people who respected each other. They built a good life, and in time they even grew to love one another. After how long? Ethan's voice was hollow. Does it matter? We are not talking about love, Mr. Cole. We are talking about a solution to a problem that could cost you everything. Clara kept her voice steady. I am offering a fair deal. You keep your ranch, and Noah keeps his home. I get security and a purpose. Nobody has to leave. We would lose our freedom, he argued. What freedom? You are already trapped by your grief in this ranch. I am trapped by being poor with nowhere to go. She took a step closer. At least this trap would have some dignity. Ethan looked at her as if she had lost her mind. You would do this? Tie yourself to a man you hardly know in a paper marriage just to fix my problem? It is my problem too now, Clara said, lifting her chin. And yes, I would do it. I would rather be a wife in name only than return to the life I ran from. The truth of her words hung in the air between them. I need time to think, he said at last, shaking his head. This is not a small thing. We do not have much time. Finch will be back in a few days. I know, Ethan said gruffly, but if we do this, it has to be our choice. He turned and walked toward the barn, his shoulders slumped. Clara watched him go, her heart pounding. She had just proposed to a grieving man who barely looked at her. The whole situation was unbelievable. She found Noah in his room lying on his bed. She sat beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry if I upset you, she said gently. You are leaving, he mumbled into his pillow. Just like everyone else. I am trying very hard not to, she told him. That is what your papa and I were talking about. Noah rolled over, his eyes wide. Really? Really. But it is complicated. Some people think it is wrong for me to live here since I'm not married to your papa. That is stupid. Maybe, but we still have to deal with it, Clara said, smoothing his hair. There might be a way for me to stay for good, but it would mean a big change. What kind of change? Well, Clara took a breath. What would you think if your papa and I got married? Noah sat straight up. Like Mama and Papa were married? Sort of, but different. It would be more like a partnership. We would be married on paper. which would solve all the problems. But things would stay mostly the same. We would run the ranch, and I would still be your teacher. Would you be my new mama? The question felt like a sharp pain in her chest. No one could ever replace your mama, Noah. But I could be someone who loves you and takes care of you. I would always be here. He thought about that with all the seriousness of a 7-year-old. Would you still read to me every night? And teach me my letters? And make the house smell good? Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Yes, all of those things. Noah threw his arms around her. Then I want you to stay forever. It is not decided yet, she warned, hugging him tightly. Your papa has to agree, and this is a very big decision for him. He will say yes, Noah said with total confidence. He has to. You make everything better. Later that evening, Ethan's chair at the dinner table was empty. After Noah was in bed, Clara waited in the parlor, unable to focus on her sewing. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet house. Ethan finally came in just before midnight, looking worn out. You should be asleep, he said. So should you, she replied, setting her mending aside. Have you made a decision? I have been thinking about Sarah, he said, saying his late wife's name for the first time. About what she would want. Clara held her breath. She was a practical woman, he said with a faint smile. People thought we married for love, but at first it was a deal. I was a struggling rancher and her school was closing. She helped me build this place and I gave her a home. The love came later after years of working side by side. That sounds like a good marriage, Clara said softly. It was, until the fever took her. Ethan sat down across from her. I told myself I would never marry again. But tonight, he looked up and met her eyes. Thinking about losing this land, failing Noah, and watching you leave, I realized I'm more afraid of all that than I am of getting married again. Clara's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? I am saying yes, he said slowly. But you need to understand. I cannot promise you love, or passion, or any of the things a wife deserves. A part of me is still gone, and I do not know if it will ever come back. I am not asking for love, Clara said. I am asking for a partnership, for honesty and respect. I can give you those, Ethan replied. We will need rules, boundaries. This is a business arrangement. Agreed. What kind of boundaries? Separate rooms, separate lives for the most part. You will run the house and teach Noah. I will run the ranch. In town, we will be a united couple, but in private, we will be colleagues, not husband and wife. It was her own proposal, but hearing him say it so bluntly hurt more than she expected. Still, she nodded. That seems fair. If one of us becomes unhappy, he continued, we talk about it. No pretending. Agreed. And Noah, Ethan's voice softened. He cannot get his hopes up that we will become a real family. He needs to know this is different. He is 7, Clara said gently. He will hope no matter what we say, but we can be honest with him. Ethan nodded. Then I suppose we are engaged. The word sounded strange and out of place. He looked terrified and resigned, like a man choosing to jump from a cliff to avoid drowning. When? She asked. Soon. Before Finch gets back. The circuit judge comes through Drywell Crossing on Fridays. If we catch him tomorrow, we can make it legal before anyone can stop us. Tomorrow, Clara whispered, her mind spinning. In 24 hours, she would be married to the man who had turned her away 5 weeks ago. A man still in love with his dead wife, who was only doing this to save his ranch. All right, she heard herself say. Tomorrow. Ethan stood and walked toward the stairs. At the top, he paused and looked back, his face a mask of exhaustion and doubt. He hesitated for a moment. Miss Whitman, Clara. Hearing him say her first name felt strange, almost intimate, even with the distance between them. Yes? "Thank you," he said, struggling to find the words. "Thank you for being willing to do this. You're saving more than just this ranch. You know that, don't you?" "I hope so," Clara whispered. He walked up the stairs, leaving her alone in the glow of the lamp. She just sat there for a long time, looking down at her hands. Tomorrow, she would be Clara Cole, a wife to a widower and a stepmother to a grieving boy, all for a marriage born of pure necessity. It wasn't the life she had imagined as a girl, but a girl's dreams rarely hold up against the hard facts of a woman's life. This was her reality now. This was her choice, and she was determined to make it count. The next morning was clear and cold for a summer day. Clara got up before the sun and put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton she brought from back east. It wasn't a wedding gown, but it would have to do. She braided her hair, pinned it up, and looked at herself in the small mirror. She looked exactly the same. That felt wrong. Shouldn't a bride look different on her wedding day? A soft knock came at her door. It was Noah peeking in. His eyes went wide. "You look pretty, Miss Whitman." "Thank you." "Sweetheart." Clara turned away from the mirror. "Are you ready?" "I think so," he said, fiddling with his shirt buttons. "Is it bad that I'm happy about this? Mama's only been gone a year, but I'm excited you're going to marry Papa." Clara knelt down and took his small hands in hers. "Your mama would want you to be happy. She would want all of us to be happy. This isn't about replacing her. It's just about moving forward. There is a difference. Will you tell me stories about her sometimes? About my mama? If your papa is willing to share, I would love to hear them too." They found Ethan in the kitchen. He was wearing what had to be his old wedding suit. It was tight across the shoulders, a testament to years of hard ranch work. He looked stiff and uncomfortable, and so very vulnerable. "The wagon's ready," he said flatly. "Judge Morton said he'd marry us at the courthouse at 9 o'clock. We ought to get a move on." The ride into town was quiet. Clara watched the land roll by, trying to push away the massive weight of what she was about to do. This was legally binding. It was supposed to be permanent. She had to stop her mind from spiraling. There was no sense in borrowing trouble from tomorrow. The Drywell Crossings courthouse was They stood inside a simple stone building that served as both the land office and the town jail. Judge Morton waited for them on the steps. He was a heavy-set man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense way about him. Two witnesses stood with him, a man and a woman Clara sort of knew from church. The judge gave them a nod. "I believe you are here to be married." Ethan said, "Yes, sir." The judge continued, "And you both enter this marriage freely, with clear heads and honest intentions." Clara and Ethan shared a look. Honest intentions. Was a marriage for survival honest enough? "Yes," they both said. "All right then, let's get on with it," Judge Morton said, opening his book. He told them, "We will keep this short unless you want the fancier version." "Short is just fine," Ethan said right away. The ceremony was quick and felt more like a business deal. The vows were about partnership and respect. There was no mention of love or passion. Clara was thankful for that. She could promise to honor him, but love felt like a lie. When it was time for the rings, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a plain gold band. Clara felt a wave of relief when she saw it was not his first wife's ring. It was new, probably bought in a hurry that morning. His hands shook a little as he slid it onto her finger. The ring was too big. It was so loose she would have to wear it on her middle finger. But it was real. It was a solid metal proof of the promises they just made. "By the power given to me by the Wyoming Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Morton snapped his book shut with a loud thud. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Cole." Mrs. Cole. The name felt like a heavy coat on Clara's shoulders. It did not fit right, but it would keep her warm. Ethan did not kiss her. The moment hung in the air, making the witnesses look away awkwardly. But Clara was glad. A kiss would have been fake, and they had promised to be honest with each other. They signed the official papers in the judge's office, their names written next to each other. Mrs. Clara Cole. Before the ink could even dry, the door flew open. Lawrence Finch barged in, his face beet red with anger. Judge Morton, I protest this entire thing. The judge looked up without a fuss. On what grounds, Mr. Finch? This marriage is a fake. It is a trick to get around the rules about moral fitness. Is that right? Judge Morton raised his eyebrows. Do you have proof that these two are not legally married? The timing is just too perfect. Yesterday I told them about the assessment. Today they are married. It is a clear manipulation. Ethan spoke, his voice like ice. What is clear is that you are trying to run my wife off her own land. Well, she is not going anywhere. She is Mrs. Cole now. It is all legal and proper. Your moral assessment means nothing. Finch's face turned a deep shade of purple. The land office will look into this marriage. If we find any proof of fraud, you will both be in trouble. What you will find is a man and a woman who were legally married in front of witnesses, Judge Morton cut in. Are you saying I performed an illegal ceremony, Mr. Finch? The land inspector stammered, but had no answer. Judge Morton gave a small, cold smile. I did not think so. Good day, Mr. Finch. I believe you're done here. Finch gave them all a hateful glare and then stormed out of the building. In the quiet that followed, Noah let out a nervous giggle. He was really mad, the boy whispered. He will get over it, the judge said. Congratulations again, Mr. and Mrs. Cole. I hope you find happiness together. They thanked him and walked outside. The bright sunlight felt too happy for the strange transaction that had just happened. Clara looked down at the ring on her finger. We need to tell people, Ethan said suddenly. We need to get out in front of the rumors. How? Clara asked. The church social is tomorrow afternoon. The whole town will be there. He looked her right in the eye. We show up together, a newly married, respectable couple. We dare anyone to say a word against it. It was a risky plan. But Clara knew it was the right move. They had to control the story before it controlled them. All right, she said. Tomorrow we go public as husband and wife. Ethan nodded, his face serious. Tomorrow we face the wolves. They rode home in a heavy silence, the weight of their decision filling the wagon. Clara twisted the loose ring on her finger. It felt strange against her skin. She was married. She was married to a man who just 6 weeks ago wanted nothing to do with her. The situation was so strange she might have laughed, but her throat was too tight with worry. Noah filled the silence with his usual chatter, not seeming to notice the tension. He asked, When we tell everyone tomorrow, do you think they will be surprised? I bet Mrs. Patterson will faint. She always faints when she hears surprising news. That is enough, son, Ethan said, but his voice was not as sharp as usual. When they got back to the ranch, Ethan helped Clara down from the wagon. His hand was steady on her elbow. The touch was short and proper, but it sent a jolt up her arm. They were married now, legally tied together. The thought made her feel dizzy. I need to go check the north fence, Ethan said, already turning toward the barn. There have been coyotes around. It is past noon, Clara said. You have not eaten anything. I will be fine. He paused for a moment without looking at her. You should get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. And then he was gone, vanishing into the dark shadows of the barn. Clara stood alone in the yard. She felt the heavy weight of their arrangement settle in her chest. This was her marriage, a marriage of distance and careful avoidance. She had agreed to it, she had even suggested it. But standing there all alone on her wedding day made the reality of it hurt more than she expected. He is scared, Noah said quietly, and slipped his small hand into hers. I know, sweetheart. Are you scared? Clara looked down at the boy. A little. Change is always scary, even when you need it. But you are not going to leave, are you? No. I made promises today. And I always keep my promises. She squeezed his hand. Come on. Let's go make something special for dinner. Your papa needs to eat, whether he knows it or not. They spent the afternoon cooking a big meal. Clara made a roasted chicken, potatoes from the garden, and biscuits that rose up golden and fluffy. It was not a wedding feast, but it was a way to mark the day. This day was important, even if their marriage was about business instead of love. Ethan came back at sunset, covered in dust and looking worn out. He stopped in the doorway and stared at the set table. Clara had used the good dishes. What is all this, he asked, his voice rough. Dinner, Clara said simply. We should eat together, as a family. The word family hung in the air between them. They were not a real family, but they were pretending to be one. And sometimes pretending is the first step to making something real. Ethan washed his hands and then sat down without another word. They ate mostly in silence, with Noah being the only one talking. The food was good, but to Clara, it tasted like nothing. When they finished, Ethan stood up. I will sleep in the barn tonight, to give you some space. That is not necessary, Clara said, confused. We agreed we would have separate rooms. I know what we agreed, he said, his jaw tight. But people talk. If someone sees a light on in two different rooms, they might get suspicious. He shook his head. This is just better. It is less complicated. Papa, you cannot sleep in the barn, Noah said. What if I have a bad dream? I will be fine, Ethan said, grabbing his hat. He looked at Clara, and she could not read the look on his face. Lock the doors. I will be back before the sun comes up. He left before they could say anything else. Noah's lips started to tremble, and Clara pulled him into a hug. He just needs some time, she whispered, but the words felt empty. This is hard for him. Everything is hard for him, Noah said with a bit of anger. He always makes things harder. Clara could not argue with that. She got Noah ready for bed and read him a story. But when she finally went to her own room, the room that had belonged to Ethan's first wife, she felt a crushing wave of loneliness. She got married today. She said vows and became a wife. And now she was spending her wedding night all alone in a dead woman's bedroom while her new husband hid in the barn. Clara sat on the bed and cried for just a few minutes. Then she wiped her eyes and sat up straight. She reminded herself that this was her choice. It was a business deal, nothing more. If she had been secretly hoping for something else, that was her own problem to deal with. The next morning, the sun came up bright and early. Clara woke up and found Ethan already in the kitchen. He had made coffee and looked as if he had not slept at all. His eyes were tired and his movements were stiff. Morning, he said, not looking at her. Good morning. Clara poured herself a cup of coffee. Are you still planning on going to the church social? Yes, we have to be seen. Make this marriage real in everybody's minds. He finally met her gaze. You think you can handle that? Playing the part of a happy couple? Can you? She fired right back. A muscle jumped in his jaw. I'll do what I have to. The social started at 2 o'clock on the church lawn. Clara put on her second-best dress, took extra care with her hair, and tried to steady her beating heart. This was it, their first public appearance as Mr. and Mrs. Cole. Noah was practically bouncing with excitement, completely unaware of the tension. Everyone is going to be so surprised. Can I be the one to tell them? We will announce it together, Ethan said. All three of us. They made sure to arrive a little late. Most of the town was already there. Every head in the place turned when their wagon pulled up. A wave of whispers spread through the crowd. Ethan helped Clara down from the wagon, his hand firm on her waist. To anyone watching, he looked like a protective husband. Only Clara could feel the slight tremble in his fingers before he let her go. Ready, he murmured, as I'll ever be. They walked into the lion's den together, with Noah right between them. The chatter didn't just get quiet, it stopped cold. Every single eye was fixed on them, filled with open shock. Margaret Thornberry was standing by the dessert table, her face turned from pale to beet red as she took in the sight. Standing next to her, a stern older man who had to be her father, Samuel Thornberry, was frowning. Even Mr. Hendricks, Clara's old tormentor, stood there with his mouth hanging open. The minister, Reverend Walsh, cautiously walked toward them. Ethan, Miss Whitman, he said, we weren't expecting to see you. It's Mrs. Cole now, Reverend. Ethan's voice boomed across the silent lawn. We were married yesterday morning by Judge Morton. I wanted to introduce everyone to my wife. The words landed like a lightning strike. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Margaret Thornberry let out a choked sob. Married? Mrs. Patterson's voice was shrill with disbelief. But y'all barely know each other. We know each other well enough, Clara said, lifting her chin. I've been managing Mr. Cole's home for over a month now. We came to respect one another and decided to make our partnership official. Partnership? Margaret spat the word out like it was poison. You schemed your way into his home and you're aiming for his land. We all know your type. What kind of woman travels halfway across the country just to trap a man? That is enough. Ethan's voice was like the crack of a whip. You will not speak to my wife that way. Your wife? Margaret's laugh was just plain ugly. For how long, Ethan? Until she has bled you dry and erased every memory of Sarah? Or maybe you couldn't wait to forget the woman who truly loved you. The cruelty of her words took Clara's breath away. But before anyone could move, Noah stepped right in front of her. You're being mean, Miss Thornberry, his little voice rang out, clear as a bell. Clara is good and kind, and she makes Papa smile when he thinks I'm not looking. She's teaching me to read, and she makes our house feel like a home again. She's not trying to replace Mama, because nobody ever could. But Mama's gone, and we're still here. And we deserve to be happy, too. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Margaret just stared at the boy, her face a mess of anger and humiliation. But Noah stood his ground, his small shoulders squared, protecting the woman who had become his friend. Noah is right, Ethan said into the quiet. My son wrote to Clara because he saw something I couldn't. He saw that we were drowning in our grief. She came here to help, and she has shown us nothing but decency and hard work. I made her my wife because I respect her and value her. And I'll be damned if I let small-town gossip run off the one person who's brought some light back into our lives. Mighty convenient, Samuel Thornberry finally spoke, his voice dripping with scorn. Marrying her the day after the land office inspector pays a visit. Some might call it smart, Ethan shot back. Finch came out to my ranch with a list of made-up complaints trying to force my hand. I just made a different choice. I chose my family. Family? Margaret's voice cracked. You don't know the first thing about family. Sarah was your family. Sarah loved you, stood by you, and built that ranch with you. And you've replaced her with this nobody from nowhere. Sarah is gone. Ethan's voice finally broke with the anguish he'd held inside for a year. She's been gone for 12 months. Nothing I do can bring her back. I loved her, and I will always love her. But she is not here. I am. And Noah has to keep living. Clara gets that. She is not trying to take Sarah's place. She is just helping us get by. Tears ran down Margaret's face. You were promised to me. Our father set it up. We were supposed to join the properties and build a life. I never agreed to that, Ethan said, his voice a bit softer. Your father wanted it. Maybe you did too, but I never did. I am sorry if you are hurt, but I will not lie to make you feel better. Reverend Walsh stepped up, trying to bring some peace to the situation. Maybe we should all calm down. This is a time to celebrate, not to argue. The Coles have announced their marriage. As their neighbors, we should wish them well. But the crowd was stuck, caught between the juicy gossip and doing what was right. Clara could feel them judging her. They hated her and saw her as an outsider who had stolen what was not hers. I think we ought to go, she whispered to Ethan. No, his voice was steady. We came here to be seen as a married couple. We are not running, he took Clara's hand, weaving his fingers through hers for everyone to see. His touch was warm and strong. My wife and I are going to get a plate and enjoy this get-together. Anyone who does not like it can feel free to head on home. It was a clear challenge. For a long moment, nobody budged. Then Mrs. Henderson, a widow who ran the town boarding house, walked over. Congratulations, Ethan and Clara, she said with a kind smile. A marriage is always a reason to celebrate. I wish you both the best. Her words broke the tension. A few other folks came forward with good wishes, some genuine and some forced. But not everyone was so kind. Margaret stomped off, her father right behind her. Several other families found reasons to leave, but enough people stayed. They offered polite words and small smiles, and the party did not fall apart. Clara found herself in stiff conversations about recipes and the weather. Her hand stayed in Ethan's the whole time. Noah stayed close, his earlier confidence gone now that he saw the trouble they were in. The afternoon passed so slowly it was painful. At last, Ethan said it was time to go home. They said their goodbyes and left with the whole town watching them. The ride home was silent. Noah, worn out from all the drama, fell asleep leaning against Clara. She just stared at the hills and tried not to think about Margaret's anger or the way people looked at her. "You handled that well," Ethan said quietly as they saw the ranch ahead. "I felt like I was being judged by a jury." "You were. We both were." He looked at her, his face softer than usual. "But we made it through. That is something." They put Noah to bed, and he barely stirred. In the quiet hallway, Clara and Ethan stood a few feet apart, unsure what to do next in their new life. "I will sleep in the house tonight," Ethan finally said. "In Sarah's old sewing room. It is small, but it will work. We need to keep up the appearance of a real marriage." "That sounds smart," Clara said, twisting her new wedding ring. "Ethan, about what Margaret said. She is hurt and just lashing out. Do not let her words get to you. But she was right about one thing. We hardly know each other. This marriage is about need, not love. What if this is all a huge mistake?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. When Sarah was passing in those last hours, she grabbed my hand. She told me, "Do not let the sadness destroy you. Do not let it destroy Noah. Find a way to keep on living, no matter how much it hurts." I did not understand her then. I thought living just meant working until I was too tired to think or feel. He looked right into Clara's eyes, and she saw a deep sadness he usually kept hidden. "But when you came here, I started to see what she meant. Living is not just about getting through the day. It is about making hard choices to move forward, even when those choices are not what people expect." He took a deep breath. "This marriage may not be normal. It might be based on what is practical instead of passion. But it is a choice we both made honestly. That has to be worth something." "I hope you are right," Clara whispered. "Me too." He went to the sewing room, and Clara went to her own room. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the old house creak, thinking about all that had happened. The next week followed a careful pattern. They stayed in separate rooms and were polite to each other, but things felt a little easier between them. Ethan started thanking her for his meals. Clara would ask him about his day on the ranch. Noah was the happy bridge between them. Some folks in town came around to the marriage, but others, like the Thornberrys, gave Clara the cold shoulder every chance they got. She learned to hold her head high and carry on. Then, 2 weeks after the wedding, Lawrence Finch came riding back, and he wasn't alone. Clara saw him from the garden, and her stomach hit the floor. She found Ethan in the barn. "Finch is here," she said, her voice tight. "And he brought men with him." Ethan's face turned to stone. "You get behind me. I'll handle this." They met the men in the yard. Finch swung down from his horse, a smug look on his face as he unrolled a document. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole," he said, dripping with false respect. "I'm just here to deliver the results of the moral fitness assessment." Ethan stood his ground. "I thought our marriage settled that." Finch's smile was pure poison. "It would have if the marriage was real. Our investigation found evidence of fraud. Witnesses say you two keep separate bedrooms and show no real affection." Clara's blood ran cold. Someone had been watching them, spying on their every move. "Our sleeping arrangements are our own business," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "Not when they prove this whole thing is a sham, ma'am. The law is mighty clear. A marriage made just to get around the rules can be annulled." Finch's eyes gleamed with triumph. "And once it's annulled, the original problem still stands. You have 30 days to get off this property." "You can't do this," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "We were married by Judge Morton himself." "He performed a ceremony, sure, but that don't make a marriage," Finch sneered. "Not in the eyes of the law, unless, of course, you can prove this is a real union. Show some evidence of a shared life, of the kind of intimacy that proves a marriage is legitimate." The filthy implication hung in the air between them. "Prove you're sleeping together, or you lose everything." "That's extortion," Clara said. You're just a grubby little man wanting to peek into our private lives. I'm demanding you prove the marriage is real, Finch countered, rolling up the paper. 30 days, Cole. He and his men rode off, leaving them in a cloud of dust and stunned silence. The trap had been laid, and they had walked right into it. Who told them? Clara asked, her voice hollow. Who's been watching us? Does it matter? Ethan sounded defeated. He's right. This isn't a real marriage, not in the way he means. We're just business partners. So, what are we going to do? He turned to her, his eyes filled with a desperate fire. We make it real. We stop sleeping in separate rooms. We stop keeping our distance. We give them exactly what they want. Proof. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. You mean we share a room? A bed? We act like a husband and wife, he said, running a hand through his hair. I know this isn't what we agreed on. I know it changes everything. But I can't lose this land, Clara. It's all I have left of Sarah's dream. It's everything I have to give our boy, Noah. You're asking me to tear down all the walls we built, she whispered. I'm asking you to help me save our home, he pleaded. I know it ain't fair and I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. Clara stared at him, her mind spinning. She had agreed to a partnership, not intimacy, but the alternative was watching everything they had built turn to dust. All right, she heard herself say. We'll make it real, whatever it takes. The words settled between them, heavy with a meaning neither of them was ready for. Clara could feel her own pulse hammering in her throat. Ethan let out a slow breath, a mix of relief and fear on his face. We have to be convincing. Whoever is spying on us needs to report back that things have changed. Then we start tonight, Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Move my things into your room. We'll make sure anyone watching can see it. And from now on, we act like a married couple that actually likes each other. Ethan gave a humorless smile. I know that's a tall order, considering. We've both asked a lot of each other, Clara said softly. This is just one more thing. They spent the afternoon moving Clara's belongings from Sarah's old room into the master bedroom. The room still held traces of his first wife. A hairbrush on the vanity, a shawl on a chair, the faint smell of lavender. Clara felt like a trespasser in a holy place. I should have done this a year ago, Ethan said from the doorway. He looked around the room with haunted eyes, packed up her things, but I just couldn't. It felt like I was erasing her. You don't have to erase her, Clara said gently. But maybe it's time to make a little room for the present. Together, they carefully packed Sarah's things into a trunk. Ethan's hands shook as he closed the lid. She was a good woman, he said, his voice thick. She deserved to see Noah grow up. I'm sure she did, Clara said, placing a hand on his arm. And I'm sure she'd want you to keep on living. Ethan covered her hand with his. The touch was quick, but it was real. Thank you for not resenting her. How could I resent a woman who obviously loved you and Noah so much? Clara squeezed his arm, then stepped back. Now, let's make this room ours. When Noah came inside for supper, he saw the changes right away. His eyes grew wide. Are you and Papa sharing a room now? He asked, his voice filled with hope. We are, sweetie, Clara confirmed. That's what married people do. Does this mean you're really married? Not just pretend married? It was a sharp question for a 7-year-old. Ethan knelt down to his son's level. We were always really married, he said gently. But we're still getting to know each other, figuring out how to be a family. It takes time. You understand? Noah nodded. Like you said, you and Mama started as friends first. Exactly like that, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. Clara and I are building something real, and it's ours. The boy threw his arms around them both. I'm glad. I was worried you were going to send her away. Never, Ethan said, meeting Clara's eyes over Noah's head. She's family now. Family stays. Later that night, after Noah was in bed, they faced the new reality of sharing a room. Clara took a long time in the washroom, trying to calm her racing heart. When she came out, Ethan was already in bed, lying on the very edge with his back to her. He had left a lamp burning low. "I won't touch you," he said, his voice quiet. "I know this is hard enough as it is." Clara slid under the covers on her side, keeping as much space between them as possible. "Thank you." They lay there in the quiet dark, stiff as boards, each one completely aware of the other. Clara stared up at the ceiling, listening to him breathe, feeling the warmth from his body across the cold sheets, and wondering how they were ever going to survive the next 30 days. The feeling of sharing a bed with a man who was her husband, in name only. "Clara." His voice was quiet in the dark room. "Yes, I am sorry for all this, for how we started, for putting you in this position." "We are both asking for the impossible," Clara whispered. "So I guess that makes us even." She heard him move a little. "When I turned you away at the train station, I thought I was protecting myself and Noah, and Sarah's memory. But I was just being scared. Scared of what? Of living. Of letting someone else get close. Of admitting that my grief was not enough to live on forever." He paused for a moment. "You scared me. You still do sometimes." Clara felt a lump in her throat. "Why?" "Because you make me feel things I thought were gone for good. Not love, not yet. But hope. The idea that life could be more than just getting by." He finally turned to face her in the faint light. "That is a scary thing, when you have told yourself that just getting by is all you deserve." Clara turned to face him. "I understand. After my folks died, I told myself that being alone was safer, but being safe and lonely is its own kind of prison. So we are just two people who have been barely living, trying to figure out how to start again," Ethan said with a small smile. "I suppose we are. Then maybe we can learn how to do it together, one day at a time." "I would like that," Clara whispered. They fell asleep like that, facing each other from opposite sides of the bed. They were not touching, but they were not so far apart either. The next few weeks found their own rhythm. During the day, Clara and Ethan made a point to act like a real married couple. They worked in the garden together and sat on the porch in the evenings. They would touch each other in small, natural ways, like their hands brushing when they passed the butter at dinner. Some of it was for show, for anyone who might be watching. But some of it was starting to feel real. Clara began to ask for Ethan's thoughts on things around the house, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Ethan started telling her stories about the ranch and about Sarah. The stories were not warnings anymore. They were like little gifts. Noah was happier than ever. He laughed all the time and was excited about his lessons. The whole house felt lighter. But the fear of losing the ranch was always there. The lawyer, Lawrence Finch, would show up now and then, always watching and taking notes. He was just waiting for them to make a mistake. 3 weeks after they started sharing a room, Clara and Ethan went to town for supplies. They walked into the general store holding hands, showing everyone they were a team. Mrs. Patterson was there with some other ladies from the church. "Mrs. Cole," she said with a fake smile. "How nice to see you shopping with your husband." "We like to make decisions together," Clara answered smoothly. "A partnership is what makes a marriage strong." "How modern," the old woman said, her eyes sharp. "Though some folks would say a real partnership takes more than a few weeks to build. And some might say a real partnership is built by facing hard times together, not by having an easy courtship," Ethan shot back. His grip on Clara's hand tightened. "My wife and I have been through more in 2 months than most people do in years. It has made us stronger." His words were bold and protective. Clara felt a warmth spread through her. He was not just putting on a show. He meant every word. Truth beneath their words. Just as they finished loading their supplies, Samuel Thornberry marched over with Margaret trailing behind him. His face was a thundercloud. "Cole, I need a word with you." "Then speak your piece." Ethan said, his voice steady as he held Clara's hand. This whole charade has gone on far too long. Everyone in town knows this marriage is just a scheme to get around the land assessment. You have made a mockery of my daughter and this whole community. My marriage is my business, Thornberry. It becomes my business when it affects my property, Samuel shot back. That land was meant to be mine when Margaret married you. We had an understanding. You had hopes, Ethan cut in, his voice like ice. I never promised a thing to you or your daughter. You assumed and you were wrong. Margaret stepped up, her face pale. Ethan, please. This woman has put some kind of spell on you. You are forgetting what you owe to Sarah's memory, to our families. I owe Sarah peace, Ethan said gently, and that means moving on with my life, not staying trapped in the past. Clara helped me see that. She is a nobody. Margaret's composure finally broke. A woman with no family and nothing to offer, willing to answer a letter from a child. She is my wife, Ethan's voice rang out sharp and clear. And she has shown more grit, more grace, and more kindness than anyone else around here, including you. A gasp went through the small crowd that had gathered. Margaret's face turned from white to red. Samuel Thornberry's hands balled into fists. You will regret this, Cole. When Finch finishes his assessment and exposes this sham, you will lose everything. Do not come crawling to us for mercy. I will not need it, Ethan said simply. I have something better. I have my family. He helped Clara onto the wagon, then climbed up and drove off without a single look back. Clara sat stiffly beside him, her heart hammering. You may have just made things a whole lot worse, she whispered. Maybe, Ethan said, glancing at her. But I am done letting bullies run my life. You are my wife. That means I stand with you and I defend you. I should have been doing that from the start. Ethan, Clara's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for what you said back there. I meant every word of it, he said, taking her hand in his. You have become important to me. Clara, a lot more important than I ever figured you would be. This whole thing started as a business deal, but it has turned into something real. Clara's eyes started to burn. For me, too. I know we agreed it would just be a partnership, but I cannot help... She trailed off, unable to say the words. Cannot help what? Ethan asked softly, hoping that it could become more, if you wanted it to. Saying it out loud made her feel completely exposed. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop on a quiet part of the road. He turned to her, his face serious. When Sarah died, I thought that part of me died with her. I figured all I had left was grief. But you, Clara, you showed me I was wrong. There is room for something more. It is not the same as what I had, and it shouldn't be. But it is real, and it is growing. What are you trying to say? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I am saying I want this marriage to be more than just a piece of paper for Finch. I am saying I am falling in love with you, Clara Cole. The words were slow and careful, but they were genuine. Tears finally spilled down Clara's cheeks. I am falling in love with you, too. I have been for a while, but I was too scared to say it. Ethan leaned in and kissed her, soft at first, then with a deepness that spoke of promises. It was their first true kiss, filled with a hope neither of them thought they would feel again. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. We are going to get through this, he said. Finch, the Thornberrys, all of it. We will fight them together. Together, Clara agreed. But the fight found them the very next day. Lawrence Finch showed up with a deputy, holding legal papers. Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole, I am here to deliver a final notice. The land office has decided your marriage does not meet the requirements for homestead claims. You have 7 days to leave the property before you are forcibly removed. Clara felt the world fall out from under her. 7 days. After all they had been through, the love they had just found, it was not enough. You cannot do this. she said, her voice trembling. "We are legally married. We share a home and a family. What more proof do you need?" "I need proof that this marriage was not just a strategy to keep your land," Finch said with a cruel smile. "You got married the day after I gave you the first warning. The timing looks mighty suspicious." "The timing proves nothing," Ethan argued. "We were building a life together for weeks before that." "According to who? Your son? Who cooked up this whole plan?" Finch shook his head. "The evidence is clear. This is fraud, and there are consequences." "Then we will appeal," Clara said, her voice filled with desperation. "We will take it to a higher court." "You can surely try," Finch said as he handed the papers to Ethan. "But you will be fighting from somewhere else. This land is forfeit. 7 days, Mr. Cole. I suggest you start packing." He and the deputy left them standing in the dust. Ethan stared at the papers, his face pale. Clara hugged herself, trying to hold it together. "We cannot just give up," she said. "There has to be another way." "Like what, Clara?" "We have done everything. We made this marriage real, but none of it matters because of bad timing. They have beaten us." "No," Clara said, grabbing his arm. "We have been playing defense. We need to go on the attack. We need to show everyone why this is really happening." "What are you talking about?" Clara's mind was racing, putting the pieces together. "Finch says the complaints are anonymous, but they are not, are they? It has been the Thornberrys all along. They want your land, and Margaret wants revenge. They are using Finch as their weapon. Even if that is true, we cannot prove it." "Maybe we can," Clara said, pacing back and forth. "Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house, she hears all the town gossip. The land office records are public. If we can tie Finch to the Thornberrys, show he is getting something out of this, we can prove this whole assessment is a crooked deal." Ethan's eyes widened with a flicker of hope. "That is a long shot." "It is the only shot we have," Clara insisted, taking his hands. "We have 7 days. Let's use them to fight instead of packing." The despair in Ethan's face was replaced by a hard resolve. "All right," he said. "Let's give them a fight." They spent the next 3 days digging for the truth. Mrs. Henderson was happy to help, telling them Finch had been seen having dinner with Samuel Thornberry more than once. A clerk at the land office, after a generous contribution to his retirement, found records that connected Finch financially to Thornberry's cattle business. They gathered statements from other ranchers who had been bullied by the Thornberrys. Ethan even found the inspector Finch had suddenly replaced right before their trouble started. On the 5th day, they laid all their proof on the desk of Judge Morton. He listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with every detail of corruption they revealed. "These are serious accusations," the judge said at last. "If you are right, Finch and the Thornberrys have committed serious crimes. But if you are wrong, this could destroy you." "We have the proof, Your Honor," Clara said, spreading the documents before him. "Financial records, witness statements, and a pattern of harassment. And we have our marriage certificate, signed by you, declaring us husband and wife. That ought to be enough for any legitimate assessment." Judge Morton looked over the evidence for a long moment. Finally, he gave a firm nod. "I will call an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. I will summon Finch, the..." Judge Morton laid it out simple for them. "Y'all will face the Thornberrys and the land supervisor. You state your case, they'll state theirs, and I will make the final decision." At home, young Noah hugged them both tight. "We are a family," he said, his voice full of faith. "And families do not lose." That night, Clara whispered in the dark. "I am scared, Ethan." "Me too," he said, kissing her hand. "But no matter what happens, you gave me a reason to fight again. I love you, Clara." "I love you too," she answered, holding him close. The next morning, the courtroom was full to bursting. The whole town was there to see how this would end. Clara, Ethan, and Noah sat together, a united front. Across the way, the Thornberrys looked sour enough to curdle milk, and the landman, Lawrence Finch, was sweating right through his collar. The judge called for order. "We are here to sort out the claim on the Cole homestead," he announced. Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole, you have the floor. For the next hour, they laid it all out plain. They spoke of the money trail between Finch and the Thornberrys. They mentioned how their neighbors had been scared into silence. They even had a statement from the last inspector, who said their homestead was perfectly legal. Then Clara stood up, her voice clear and steady. Your Honor, our marriage did not start with flowers and poems. It started with hard work, respect, and building a life from scratch. It might have started strange, but it is as real as any marriage in this town. We have a home. We have a son. We love each other. That is not fraud, Your Honor. That is a family. The room was dead quiet. Even Margaret Thornberry was crying softly. The judge fixed his eyes on Finch. Well, Mr. Finch, what do you have to say for yourself? Finch got to his feet, trembling. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. The complaints seemed real enough. Complaints from who exactly? The judge cut in. Finch darted a look at Samuel Thornberry, who gave a tiny shake of his head. But it was too late. The man's nerve broke. From Samuel Thornberry, he mumbled. He told me to look into it. The judge's voice turned to steel. And what about the money you invested in his cattle company? That is separate, Finch stammered. That means you had a reason to help him, a reason you never mentioned, Judge Morton shot back. This whole business was rotten from the get-go. He then turned his hard gaze on Samuel Thornberry. Care to explain yourself? The old man rose, full of pride. That land should have been my daughter's. Cole made promises, then brought this woman here. I was just protecting my family. By cheating a man out of his home? The judge's voice boomed. That is not protecting family, Mr. Thornberry. That is corruption. The gavel slammed down. The assessment on the Cole homestead is thrown out. Their claim is good and legal. As for you, Mr. Finch, you are out of a job. And Mr. Thornberry, the law will be having a word with you about this little scheme. The room exploded with cheers. Ethan wrapped Clara in a huge hug as tears of joy ran down her face. Noah was right there with them, laughing and crying all at once. They had done it. They had won. Outside, folks who had once doubted them now shook their hands and clapped their backs. As they walked to their wagon, Margaret Thornberry stopped them. Her father was long gone, steaming with rage. I am truly sorry, she said, looking at the ground. I was bitter, and I was wrong. Clara looked at her with kindness. Thank you, Margaret. I hope you find your own happiness someday. The other woman just nodded and walked away. Ethan put his arm around Clara's waist. Ready to go home? He asked softly. Clara smiled, the word feeling right for the very first time. Home. Yes, let us go home. The peaceful weeks that followed were a time for healing. With the danger behind them, the arrangement between Clara and Ethan blossomed into a genuine partnership, built on love. They started a new life. Young Noah began to thrive, his reading got better, and his heart started to mend. His mother became a warm memory, not a constant ache. The ranch prospered under their care. 6 months after the trial, on a cool autumn evening, Ethan found Clara in the garden. He held a small box in his hands. What is this? She asked. Your first ring never did fit right, he said softly. And I reckon I never properly asked. I just made demands. He opened the box to show a simple gold band. Clara Cole, will you marry me? Not because we have to, not to save this ranch or to satisfy any government man, but because I love you. I choose you, and I want to spend the rest of my days building our future together. Clara laughed through happy tears. We are already married, you impossible man. I know, he said, his voice full of warmth. But I want to do it right this time, with real intention, with love. He slipped the new ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. So, what is your answer? Yes, Clara whispered, and pulled him into a kiss. Yes, to all of it. Forever. As the sun set over the mountains, they stood together, two broken people who had made each other whole. Noah came running from the house shouting that supper was ready. They walked back as one, hand in hand. They were three strangers who had become a permanent, beautiful family, all because of a little boy's hopeful letter. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.